Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 17th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up,
we'll be talking about Ukraine, I have the president coming in on Friday. He would like to have tomahawks.
Zelensky in the White House will ask whether a third trip to Washington could win the support the Ukrainian president needs from the US to win the war against Russia. But we'll hear the latest on the details of a planned meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and see how that could change things. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, after 2 decades of leaning to the left, could Bolivia be about to elect a right-wing president? We'll look ahead to this weekend's elections and ask what a change in political direction could mean for the rest of the region. We'll find out why London's Frieze Art Fair, once a highlight of the elite art calendar, is struggling to compete with its neighbours. Plus,
we learned that if it was probably optimistic to expect much in the way of perspective and humility from Donald Trump, we learned that his 5th smartest child was here to help on that front.
Andrew Mueller will be here with what we learned. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor John Bolton has said he's looking forward to defending himself after he was indicted on charges related to the alleged mishandling of classified information. The US Admiral Alvin Halsey, who leads US military forces in Latin America, is to step down following reported tensions between him and the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And the ultra-low-cost carrier Spirit Airlines is to furlough 365 staff and downgrade the status up to 170 pilots as part of a restructuring effort. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, President Trump says he's planning to meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in Hungary to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. The announcement came after the two leaders spoke by phone for at least 2 hours yesterday. So what does this development mean for Ukraine's President Zelensky? He arrived yesterday evening in Washington to try to persuade President Trump to give him long-range Tomahawk missiles. Well, I'm joined now by Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex and a regular voice here. Good morning, Natasha.
Good morning.
So this was all going to plan for Volodymyr Zelensky, wasn't it? Until there was this announcement of a 2-hour phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and this subsequent planned meeting in Hungary.
Exactly. And so this is going to pose problems for Zelensky with his meeting with Trump, because things had been going really well after the Alaska summit between Putin and Trump. And when Trump realized that Putin doesn't listen to anything he says and basically is nice to him, and then the next day bombs everybody. And I'm just paraphrasing the way Trump says this. And so he changed his tack. Trump completely changed his view on Ukraine, saying, I think Ukraine can regain all of its territory. That's a big change from when he said that Crimea should be part of Russia. And he started to support Ukraine engaging in more aggressive tactics. And then flirting with the idea of supporting Ukraine through providing Tomahawk missiles, which can be launched from ships and submarines, and they could carry nuclear warheads or conventional warheads. And this apparently got Putin's ear, and supposedly the Russians contacted the U.S. about some meeting, and then it was this great phone call. And then we're already hearing Trump hedging about providing Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. And this is one of the key things of this meeting that Zelensky and Trump are having about the potential of having these types of missiles, which will give Ukraine far more range to go after Russian targets.
So what is the likelihood of Tomahawks actually now being supplied to Volodymyr Zelensky and to Ukraine?
Well, we can only take Trump for his words, and he's saying, well, we don't really have a huge supply, that the U.S. doesn't have enough Tomahawk missiles, and they might not be able to provide Ukraine with this. It's not clear if Trump was saying this, that he might provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine to try to get the Russians to be really worried and to get them to negotiate. So we don't know if it was a ploy or if he really intended to do so. And it's hard to predict what Trump is going to do because he's just been going back and forth with this so much. It's hard to keep track of what his latest point of view is.
Indeed, because we've been here before, haven't we, that he makes threatening sounds towards Russia. And as soon as they get on the phone, Donald Trump seems to be pacified somehow by what President Putin says to him. But how likely are we, when it comes to Volodymyr Zelensky's presence at the White House today, to going back to that terrible scene in February when he was publicly eviscerated? Is there a sense that actually Zelensky could regain Trump's ear?
So I think Zelensky's relationship with Trump is much improved, and I don't see really any chance of them going back to that horrible press conference in February. As you mentioned, Zelensky has learned how to deal with Trump, how to talk to Trump, what basically the language is. He had received support from other European leaders about the particular way you have to deal with him and talk with him. I think that Trump does see Zelensky as a partner that he can count on more because he's been more steady and consistent compared to dealing with Putin. He just admires Putin and is desperate to be his friend. I mean, we've seen press conferences where he said something to that effect, how disappointed he has been in Putin. So I don't see anything like that. And we also see that the U.S. has increased its intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and I think that's something that could continue, and that's been really effective. The U.S. has also started to support Zelensky targeting energy infrastructure. That was something he was telling Zelensky to back off of, that Ukraine shouldn't be doing that prior to the Alaska summit. So I think there are other things that the U.S. can continue to do. And I think Trump is seeing that he does need to ramp up support for Ukraine in order to get Putin back to the negotiation table.
What can Donald Trump do for Ukraine? We are in a situation now where for Ukraine, things have stayed the same. Russia's full-scale invasion of the country continues apace 3 years on. But for Donald Trump, he is now the man of the moment when it comes to forging peace. The Peace 25 moment at the beginning of this week between Israel and Hamas, with all these world leaders, was a defining point probably in Trump's eyes in terms of his ability to bring peace to the earth. Is there something inside him now that will motivate him to try to bring about a similar moment with Ukraine-Russia?
Well, he's definitely a little bit more motivated than he was before, sensing that he had an accomplishment here. And as he has said many, many times, he really wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and he didn't win it and seemed to be upset about that. I think he's trying to put the pressure on. So there was a time when even his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said he was sort of bored by the conflict. He wasn't really interested in trying to resolve it because he thought it couldn't be resolved, the one between Russia and Ukraine, I should mention. So I think he's going to try to put more pressure on Russia. His special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has wanted a plan where there is a lot of pressure applied on Russia and a lot of military support provided to Ukraine. And so that those two factors will be really important. What Zelensky is wanting is more air defense missiles, more air support. They've been able to miraculously deal with all of the drones, and that's something where the U.S. hasn't been able to really be helpful. This is where Ukraine is well above and beyond the West and NATO, is their ability to intercept and shoot down all of the drones and the swarming of drones that Russia has been using on Ukraine. But where the U.S. can be helpful is with air support and with providing long-range missiles.
Where can Ukraine look if Donald Trump proves to be an unreliable ally. The EU-NATO defence map that was talked about over the last couple of days, it shores up Europe's borders, but that commitment from Europe to step up is still not enough, is it?
No, I mean, so what Ukraine is asking for is for more military support. They've been asking for this for some time now, that this is what they need, but they're actually also starting to sell and share their the advancements that they've made in producing drones, because now we're seeing that NATO countries are not immune from the attacks from Russia, whether it be just to cause psychological tensions, but by having drones that are flying over NATO countries, with NATO really far behind in being able to intercept these drones, we're seeing that Ukraine feels that it has something to offer NATO countries in the West. And it's hoping in return it will continue to get sustained and reliable military aid.
Finally, let's talk about Melania. She has said that she has an open channel of communication with Vladimir Putin. This is the First Lady, Melania Trump, over the welfare of Ukrainian children. What does that suggest about the channels of communication between Moscow and Washington?
I mean, that was such a peculiar story that I had read. It made very little sense, because she doesn't tend to get involved in really anything. And she says she wants to stay out of things. And, she famously wore a jacket that said, "I don't care, do you?" And so she's really a mystery. But what it does say is that there is much closer communication and open channels between the Trump administration, probably informal channels, than we really realize.
Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. 7:11 a.m. here in London, 2:11 a.m. in Sucre. And for the past 2 decades, Bolivia has been a resolutely left-leaning nation, choosing to be governed continuously by the socialists. Well, recently the political landscape has changed, and this weekend the South American country could find itself voting for a right-wing president. To explain all, I'm joined by Dr. Celia Susterman, who's associate at Irindel Associates, based here in London. Good morning, Celia.
Good morning to you.
So we have a runoff, don't we, between a conservative and a centrist?
We do indeed. The first round of the elections were held in August, and the two top candidates were right-leaning ones. And for the first time in 20 years, there will be no left-wing candidate running in a country where there are deep polarizations, both in terms of ethnicity and regionalism. So you've got on the Western Highlands the poorest, more population with the largest indigenous proportion of citizens, while in the Eastern lowlands, you've got the richest fertile agricultural lands where the white and business-led population lives. And the problem was that there were so many divisions in the MAS, the movement towards socialism led by Evo Morales, that the party split into endless factions, meaning that in the end, the candidate they fielded in August, Andrónico Rodríguez, only got a measly 3% of the vote.
Which means that the movement to socialism, which has been such a powerful force inside Bolivia, almost didn't have, it almost lost its legal status, doesn't it? So who are we left with this weekend? We have Rodrigo Pereira, who's a Christian Democrat Party, centrist, pushing for private sector growth. And then we have Tuto Quiroga, who is conservative, wants austerity measures and privatisation. Two very different paths to take Bolivia.
Very different paths from the last 20 years when Bolivia came into the Latin American scene riding on the wave of what was then termed the pink tide. There's very little of the pink tide left, and in fact there is a shift towards right-wing policies in the region in general, with the exceptions of places like Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And the problem is that throughout those 20 years when Mas under Evo Morales was in power, there was a very strong social movement set in place with a history of extreme violence. And the fear now is that on Sunday, with no representation for Mas, whoever gets elected, whether it's Jorge Tuto Quiroga, who was president very briefly in the early 2000s, and then joined the party set up by the former military dictator Hugo Banzer. He, in the first round, Tuto Quiroga obtained 28% of the vote, and the frontrunner was Rodrigo Paz of the Christian Democratic Party with 30% of the vote, with the slogan "Capitalism for All." Now, interestingly, Rodrigo Paz is the son of Paz Zamora, who was president earlier in Bolivia, and who had appointed Tuto Quiroga as his finance minister back in 1992, when Quiroga was only just aged 32. So we now have both men, one running against the successor to his father, and the other one trying to steer Bolivia well away from anything resembling pink tide, and away from Iran, China, and Russia, which were the three preferred geopolitical partners preferred by Evo Morales.
Finally, let's place this in a geographical context, in a regional context. You mentioned the countries which have stayed to the left, pushing Bolivia to the right, in not necessarily in such an extreme way as we should see perhaps in neighbouring Brazil, but having a slightly more subtle and nuanced political shift to the right or to the centre would do what wider regionally?
Well, it would have a very important impact, especially as far as the relations with the United States are concerned, because for 20 years the United States was depicted, partly correctly, of course, as an imperialist country trying to set its norms on Bolivia in terms of eradication of coca production. You have to remember that Bolivia still is together with Colombia, the highest coca producer in the Americas, coca, of course, being the base for cocaine. So the United States has always pursued a policy of eradication, which would hurt the livelihoods of the farmers of the Western Highlands, who Morales used to be himself one of them, used to represent. And so there will be, the pink tide is being replaced slowly but surely by, shall we say, blue tide, with people like Javier Milei in Argentina or Bolsonaro in Brazil, although Bolsonaro now has been sentenced to prison, home detention, for attempting to organize a coup against Morales back in 2019. But there are really era-dominant changes happening in Latin America currently.
Dr. Celia Susterman, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme. No laughing matter. We'll hear about the rise of bear attacks in Japan. Stay with us.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. So you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
19 minutes past 7 a.m. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me is Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow of the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, usually in here to give us the latest on the Middle East, now giving us a much more general and broad approach to what the newspapers are reporting. A very good morning to you, Yossi. How are things? You've had quite a week, I would imagine.
Good morning. Yes, for a change after 2 horrible, horrific years of talking, so many times here about how the situation is getting worse and worse, and the death toll, and, hostages that are there, and no political horizon. At least there was some cause of hope. So, of course, with the Trump circus arriving to the Middle East, it gives a bit of a different flavor. But honestly, to see that the fighting stop at FIFA, the hostages back, creating some hope that this is the end of this war was a better week than over the last 2 years.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear it. Let's talk actually first about a story that you wanted to bring from Haaretz. We're going to walk away. We're going to move away from the Middle East in a moment. But seeing as you are talking about it, Haaretz, which brings such a different view from many other publications, especially within Israel, doesn't have a huge readership, does it? It's not massively, it doesn't have a very, very loud voice. It has a very human voice.
Yeah, I would say it's not always about the quantity, it's about sometimes the quality. But, this is very biased view that I read it. But I think, yes, it's a very progressive, liberal voice in Israel. And much needed ones, considering what has been going there for many years, the attack on the Democratic Foundation. And this specifically, it's about the role of civil society, of protest. So we know that everyone gives credit to, and deservedly so, for Trump stopping the war. But at the same time, the constant protest, and, someone who witnessed it whenever I visit there, thousands of people gather, especially on a Saturday night, before the war, to defend democracy, and after the war to ensure that the government remembers the first and foremost is ending the war and bringing the hostages back. And, you see there is power in that. And then sometimes I think there is a universal lesson there. It's about the role of civil society. Sometimes we feel powerless. We said, okay, even democracy, we vote once every 4 or 5 years, and that's about it. And in between, we have no influence. And I think the fact that protest can play such an important role and keep the pressure on government, and sometimes the role of NGO, the role of people even writing letters to their representative, and sometimes protesting. And we saw here in the UK as a great power.
But how much of a genuine power has it been? Yes, it has allowed the plight of the hostages, people to express themselves publicly, to be seen and to have their presence maintained. But the amount of pressure that this has genuinely exerted on, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu has been what? Because if we cast our minds back to before October 2023, there were regular protests against Benjamin Netanyahu and nothing was done.
But I think actually a lot of the legislation was between the rhetoric of the changes and the actually changes when it came to legislation. There was a huge difference. So I think they slowed down considerably. But I think with the case of the hostages, it moves more the Americans than Netanyahu. Netanyahu is about Netanyahu and maintaining his, survival in power. But people like Witkoff and even Trump was actually more subject to the plight of the parents and the of the hostages. So I think in a way it worked. They were moved. And of course, with the power of the United States, I think it actually made a difference.
Thank you for that, Yossi. Right, let's move to a story in the Washington Post. It's a story that's broken over the last 8 or 9 hours. Former Trump aide John Bolton had a famous falling out with him. He is now fallen out with him so badly that Donald Trump has now made him the 3rd former Trump administration figure to be indicted. He said he's looking forward to defending himself. But what is this all about?
I think there is a kind of an American obsession when they end their time in office. They take a lot of documents and then write their memoirs and probably making a lot of money. But it makes no sense why they take these documents. So in this case, I think there are two stories. A, how vindictive is Trump? And going after whether it's him or Comey, the former head of the FBI, and looking for reasons to imprison them. We all remember from the election, the first election, the chants about Hillary Clinton, lock her up. So is this kind of the idea? If it's a rival, we need to lock them up. In the case of Bolton, it's finding probably classified documents that he shared with relatives. He said they are not classified what he shared. According to the charges, it is. So it will make a very interesting case in court. So it's the kind of the nature of politics right now in the United States, vindictive. But we know Trump collected a lot of documents after, when he left the White House. They found also with former President Biden. So I think sometimes when it comes to excessively classified documents, they should kind of rethink.
Indeed, because the accusation, it's quite interesting that the accusations is that messages were sent through a personal email, which was later hacked by what the US believes was the government of Iran or an organisation associated with it. What was shared was his diaries. Exactly. Which is not classified. Not
classified, but still can be harmful. But again, it's kind of rich coming from the Trump administration, considering that some very senior people there were on social media sharing when the United States was about to attack Yemen. So I think they have some issues with how to keep secrets right now in the US and how they share, even if it's not classified. If in the diary can be a thing. It's not, I think, there more than anything else with John Bolton, because he became such a critic of Trump that is looking to hurt him.
Yes, casting some legal shade, I think it is. Look, let's look at a story in the Financial Times that broke about 2 hours ago, which is Saudi Arabia is talking about a defence deal with the Trump administration. So this is being compared directly to the US-Qatar pact last month. Yeah. And that pact, the principle behind it was any attack on the Gulf state is a threat to American peace and security as well. Something similar for the US and for Saudi Arabia would mean what regionally?
First of all, it's a reminder to be the kind of the Article 5 of NATO. So it's a kind of creating a mini NATO within the Middle East. If tells everyone they try to attack American allies, listen, you're going to have business with the United States, and we are the most powerful military in the world. It's got even kind of, I think, become more point after Israel actually bombed Qatar and the capital, Doha. So the idea that everyone, I think mainly this is, I think the message is to Tehran and Iran. If you think about attacking any of our allies from the United States point of view, then you'll have to deal with the United States. I think what the United States is trying to build a new security architecture, but also a political, economic architecture in the Middle East. Whether Iran part of it or not, it's a question. Those of us who part of their job is to listen to Trump speeches, including more than an hour of it in the Knesset this week. He talks about the golden age of the Middle East, which, you move from only security and war actually for economic opportunities. But I think this pact is part of it, defending what they're trying to be.
Finally, we can touch briefly on back here in the United Kingdom, most of Great Britain's major rail operators are now back in public hands. So there is a need for sort of a kind of a definition of a new era. And they have done something rather beautiful, and they've done something rather clever. They've made a clock.
Again, we all know the beautiful clocks in many train stations in the world. And
hello, Switzerland.
Hello, Switzerland.
Hello, Switzerland.
Or sometimes, even in the US, some grand stations.
Oh, yeah.
And all of these clocks. But none of them is digital. And this is the first one in the UK that is a digital one. They try also to work on the symbols of the trains in the UK. So it's also about accuracy. So British Rail is not always, that's why it's been renationalized, or much of it, because it's not known for being accurate. So you're up with this digital huge clock in London Bridge, which was the second station that originally in 1852 had the huge clock, is also to send a message, of modernization of the train station. So it looks, at least in the photos, I need to go and see that, but it looks very impressive. What it doesn't have, it says also the hours and the minutes, but not the second. The second is kind of a strange connection of a circle that moves. Yes. So if you miss it by a few seconds, you might miss your train.
A strange connection of a circle moves is about as accurate a description as I can find. It's a very beautiful clock. It's at London Bridge in the centre of the British capital. Yossi McElberg, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on The Globalist. Now here's a quick summary of some of the other stories we're following today. President Donald Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, has said he's looking forward to defending himself after being indicted on charges related to the alleged mishandling of classified information. He's a third of Mr. Trump's critics to be charged in recent weeks. Meanwhile, the US Admiral Alvin Halsey, who leads US military forces in Latin America, is to step down. It's been reported there's been tension between him and the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. And US officials have confirmed the country's military carried out a strike on Thursday on another vessel in the Caribbean. It's the sixth such strike against vessels. At least 3 people have been killed in Kenya as police try to disperse crowds trying to view the body of the late political leader Raila Odinga at a stadium. Calm was later restored. Mr. Odinga's funeral is being held today. And the ultra-low-cost carrier Spirit Airlines is to furlough 365 staff and downgrade the status of up to 170 pilots. It's part of a restructuring effort. Spirit filed for bankruptcy for the second time in a year in August, but said its business plan is to return to profit in 2 years. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 15:31 in Tokyo, which is where we head now, because Japan has seen a record surge in bear encounters this year, with more than 100 attacks and a record number of sightings reported across the country, including in residential and tourist areas. Well, the revised Wildlife Protection and Management Law, which took effect last month, is trying to strengthen local government's ability to respond to this growing problem, showing Japan's determination to address the issue seriously. I'm joined now by Julian Ryle, who's a Daily Telegraph's correspondent in Japan. Good afternoon, Julian.
Good evening.
Have you seen a bear?
Not recently,
Okay.
Although I have seen them. I have seen them in the very far north of Japan many years ago. Yes, ambling along a road. They are part of the scenery in much of northern Japan.
And there's a growing number of them.
There are indeed. I just was doing some research and I found a statistic that in 2012, numbers were down to around 12,000 on the main island of Honshu of Japan. But that is up to 44,000 now. So yes, they are proliferating and they're becoming a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more outgoing, perhaps, we should say.
What do you mean by that? These emboldened bears?
Absolutely. They're coming out of the mountains. So a lot of Japan is experiencing rural depopulation. The villages are getting smaller, the towns are getting smaller, the young people are moving to the cities for education and work opportunities. So it's the old folk who are left behind, and these communities are shrinking. So the bears are getting a little bit bolder, and they're coming into these villages and suburban areas. Also, there are far fewer hunters than there used to be in the past. So the bears are no longer nervous of being around people. So they are a little bit more aggressive and just in your face, if you like. So yes, that's why we seem to be having more of these encounters.
And these encounters are we were being quite gentle about this. Actually, people are dying. People are being attacked and are losing their lives.
Absolutely, yes. As you said, we've had the 7th fatality confirmed so far this year, and that's a record since these statistics were first compiled in 2006. And we are still some way off winter and hibernation for the bears. So there will certainly be more fatalities between now and then. There's been a bad crop in the mountains of beech nuts and acorns and the berries that the bears rely on before they go into hibernation. So they are extending their ranges. They're going into these suburban areas, and they're becoming a little bit more desperate as the temperatures do fall. So it's inevitable that there are going to be more and more encounters in the weeks and potentially months ahead.
So what are the authorities doing about this?
They've relaxed the laws on shooting bears. Previously, the laws on shooting bears in suburban and urban districts were very, very tight. Obviously, they had to be extremely careful of residents and people in these areas. They've made those a lot easier. They're making it easier to get guns or to have guns to be registered hunter. And there are other trapping initiatives. Farmers are being encouraged to do what they can to deal with the problem. But they are quite easy. These bears adapt easily to the environment, and the rural districts of Japan aren't going to be repopulated anytime soon. So they have larger areas to roam free in.
So this wildlife protection and management law, the difference it will make will be what?
Well, I just think that people will be able to, hunters will be given greater reign to go out and shoot bears. And there might very well be bear bounties. So they'll be given rewards for bringing in more bears. But again, it doesn't really solve the problem of a countryside that is largely devoid of people now.
Julian Ryle in Tokyo, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. It's Friday, so here's Andrew Muller with What We Learned.
We learned this week that Norwegians just cannot take a hint.
They gave it to Obama for doing absolutely nothing. He got the Nobel Prize for doing nothing. They should give me the Nobel Prize. Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. I had so many people, you should get the Nobel Prize.
Although it turns out they do make quite pleasant folk music. Can I get some general muttered agreement? We learned that, yes, despite the characteristically subtle and self-effacing campaigning of US President Donald Trump,
my rhetoric kept you out of wars. I stopped wars from happening. If it were somebody else, they would have gotten 5 Nobel Prizes. I never even got a mention.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee had instead chosen to risk a vindictive American annexation of Svalbard by giving it to someone obviously less deserving, because who isn't? But we also learned that the Norwegian Nobel Committee were not above toying with a chap's emotions.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 goes to a brave and committed champion of peace.
Straighten your tie, Mr. President.
To a woman.
Aww. Well, quite. We did, however, shortly thereafter learn, and yes, we know this happened last Friday, but we record these on Thursdays to play on Fridays. We've explained this before. Keep up. Who the real winner was.
The person who actually got the Nobel Prize called me and said, I'm accepting this in honor of you because you really deserved it.
But we learned that the president's supporters were taking his disappointment every bit as philosophically, graciously, and above all, sanely as might have been expected, and none more so than Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia's 1st District, and surely at least once the reason that his fellow Georgian US President and Nobel Peace Laureate Jimmy Carter uttered the phrase, "Dear God, no, absolutely no relation."
That's why he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, and that's why I'm introducing a resolution for a sense of Congress today that will honor him with the Nobel Peace Prize.
Pretty sure that's not how this works, Congressman, as indeed it can well be imagined that someone has said to Buddy Carter as he tried to pop corn in a tumble dryer. However, encouraged by this notion of simply awarding oneself prizes on which one has missed out,
and the winner of the special Super Duper Gold Trophy with a dinosaur on top for funniest and cleverest weekly news review monologue is What We Learned on Monocle Radio.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. No, but seriously. We also learned in an irony that he's surely causing President Trump to emit the odd wry chuckle that the week of his cruel snub by those whale-scoffing weirdos in Oslo should also be the week he achieved a diplomatic feat arguably more significant even than his brokering of peace between
Azerbaijan and Albania.
Or resolving the equally intractable and non-occurring conflict involving
Cambodia and Armenia.
We learned that, yes, and can we maybe get a gritting teeth sound effect behind the rest of this sentence? That Trump had helped bring a halt to a little over 2 years of war in Gaza. But we learned that this genuinely momentous accomplishment was not about to stop him conducting the attendant diplomatic formalities like he was guest compere of the Dean Martin celebrity roast.
France, thank you very much, Emmanuel. I would imagine Emmanuel standing someplace behind me. Where is he? I can't believe it. You're taking a low-key approach today. Italy. We have a young woman who's, I'm not allowed to say it because usually it's the end of your political career if you say it. She's a beautiful young woman. Now, if you use the word beautiful in the United States about a woman, that's the end of your political career, but I'll take my chances. We have Hungary. Oh, Victor, where is Victor? Victor. We love Victor. Victor, I call him. You know, I put the little accent on it. You are fantastic, all right? I know a lot of people don't agree with me, but I'm the only one that matters.
Try the veal, tip your waiters, here all week, and so forth. But we learned that if it was probably optimistic to expect much in the way of perspective and humility from Donald Trump, we learned that his fifth smartest child was here to help on that front.
And look how much better humanity and our world is. You know, we're saving Christianity. We're saving God. We're saving the family unit. We're saving this nation.
From which rash of media appearances, we learned that Eric Trump has written a book.
Oh, no.
Or at least typed into ChatGPT the prompt rattle me up 70,000 words, expanding my own Wikipedia page into a lachrymose screed of self-justification, self-pity and paranoid fantasy, pitching my powerful billionaire family as the most persecuted people in all of human history. But we learned as he shilled his tome that the immense and imaginary suffering endured by his unfortunate tribe had in no way diminished an abiding sense of right and wrong and a profound belief in impartial justice. And we learned this from his righteous rage at New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who once filed fraud charges against Eric's father and upon whom Eric's father has recently set the Department of Justice because, she once rented a house to her grandniece, possibly without being entirely straight with her mortgage provider about her intentions in this regard, and that said grandniece may have been other than a model citizen at various points in her life. Yes, we're looking forward to the 27-part true crime podcast as well. But we learned that Eric Trump demands higher standards of public officials forsworn to uphold and abide by the laws of the land.
Somebody who's apparently committed mortgage fraud, and somebody apparently has a felon living in their home right now. Clearly you're not allowed to do that.
A convicted felon in the family home. Imagine. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you, Andrew. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
We head now to Canada for the latest in the climate news world. I'm joined now by Sheena Rossiter, our contributing editor in Edmonton. Good evening, Sheena.
Good evening and good morning to you.
To have you with us. Let's talk about the latest headlines in climate, and one of them is about heat waves.
Yeah, so this was a massive report that came together with a bunch of renowned climate scientists. Some were from the World Weather Attribution, and a couple were with the US-based Climate Central. They all teamed up, and what they did is they did several computer simulations where they're calculating heat waves, which is ultimately one of the biggest climate effects that affect people. So these scientists are looking to see how much of a difference the Paris Climate Accord, the landmark agreement that took place 10 years ago, how much that's really impacted rising temperatures around the world. So what they did is they tracked and they looked to see how many super hot days are going to be happening by the end of the century. And it's reported that it's going to be 57 super hot days in total, with smaller nations now being more affected by these biggest carbon polluting countries. And that is basically what we're tracking right now by the end of the century.
Is there any good news in this? I mean, this is a very difficult question to ask because these reports generally outlay or outline a difficult situation which is very hard to grasp.
Yes, of course. 57 extra super hot days by the end of the century is definitely hard to grasp. But that actually is the good news, because what this study found is that because of the efforts to curb emissions of heat-trapping gases that started 10 years ago because of the Paris Climate Accord agreement, that actually has had a positive impact. Without the measures that have been put into effect, what they found in this report is that actually the Earth would be heading towards an additional 114 super hot, deadly days if nothing was put into effect 10 years ago in Paris.
How did they work these numbers out?
Yeah, so important to mention, this isn't peer-reviewed yet, but they did use established techniques that are traditionally used for climate attribution. So what they did is they calculated how many super hot days the world and more than 200 countries have had since 2015, and how many Earth can get between now and future scenarios. So in one scenario, they looked at to see if we're still continuing to curb the emissions by 2021, that we're keeping in line with the promises of the Paris Climate Accord, and then the world will warm to 2.6 degrees Celsius. That's above pre-industrial times, and that would equal to that 57 extra hot days. But the other scenario they warned is if nothing was done at all, based on the Paris Agreement, that would actually go up to 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. So what does this really mean for us? Well, let's just think back to that week-long heat wave that happened in Southern Europe back in 2023. If nothing was done with the Paris Climate Accords 10 years ago, that heat wave that happened in 2023, it would likely have been 70% hotter than it actually was. And if the world keeps climate fighting efforts and they don't decrease this, a similar heat wave at the end of the century would likely to be 3 degrees hotter, according to this report. And this is just really significant because we can't forget that hundreds of thousands of people around the world have died due to heat waves.
Sheena, let's focus a little bit on where you are and Canada. There are elections coming up, local elections. Is climate being mentioned anywhere in the campaigns?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because a couple provinces here in Alberta were going elections. Likewise, they are in Quebec. So it really just depends on which part of the country you're in. But in Quebec, the second most populous province in the country, a recent poll done by Leger said that 1 month out from the municipal elections, 81% of people in Quebec believe that it's really important for municipalities to take action against climate change. And so this is a huge issue when it comes to the ballot when they go to vote on November 2nd. But interestingly enough, I thought this was interesting. Quebecers over the age of 55, 85% of them actually believe that climate change is a more important issue in municipal elections than those who are between the ages of 18 to 34. usually we would have thought it would have been the other way around. But some reasons that might be that older people are a little bit more concerned is because younger people are more likely to be launching into adulthood, and the weight that just carries with things like a housing crisis and a tight labor market, which we're experiencing here in Canada.
Sheena Rossiter, Monocle's contributing editor in Edmonton, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist. A little earlier this year, the Swiss knife manufacturing giant Victorinox announced that part of the manufacturing process of its famous knives would be transferred to the United States. It had anticipated the introduction of tariffs when the Trump administration arrived. Well, now Victorinox is expanding into less volatile markets and is also broadening its product range too. How will it fare? Well, to tell us about this story of endless adaptability, a little like a Swiss Army knife, I'm joined now from Zurich by Markus Schergel, Associate Professor at St. Gallen University Institute for Marketing, a regular voice around the studio table at Dufourstrasse 90, especially on Monocle on Sunday. Good morning, Markus. Good to have you.
Good morning, Emma.
Just tell us a little bit about what the problems that Victorinox is facing.
Well, I think that's a typical problem that many Swiss companies have right now. The one thing that they have is this tariff thing with the United States, with a tariff rate that is above 30% for general exports to the United States. And this hits Victorinox, I think, in a very special way, as they are producing and manufacturing about, right now, I think more than 90% of their Swiss Army knives here in Switzerland. They transport them to the United States, and then they do some finishing over there. As other journals are saying and other newspapers are saying, they're losing money by the minute when they sell a Swiss Army knife. So this is a huge challenge that is representative for most of the manufacturing companies here in Switzerland. So basically what they are facing is that one of their most important export markets, where they have one of the best images that you could think of, as the GIs in the Second World War went to Europe and came back with a Swiss Army knife, and it stands for, from my point of view, it's one of the brands that profits most from technological and craftsmanship representation in the brand of Switzerland and inherits in the Victorinox brand. They've got a huge problem of harvesting on that potential. Even if they would put more actions into or activities into the American market, they will not be able to really foster on a margin that makes that business profitable again.
So this is now therefore the moment when Victorinox has to diversify. So I mentioned a moment ago that it's expanding into less volatile markets, and it's also expanding its product range as well. Let's talk about the new markets that it's going to. So with the American market not being what it used to be traditionally, as you have just described, where does it look?
I think they should be looking, and they will be looking into South America and Asia. Whilst I think that the Asian market, which is true for many European companies, is undervalued and underrepresented in their country portfolio, I think that a Swiss Army knife could easily take over a function like in the United States for people in Asia, especially when you look into Singapore, Indonesia, when you look into Malaysia, and the larger countries. This is really something where you need to have your eyes on, even if there wouldn't be the tariffs of the United States. It's something where the growth region is for many companies, and it's a little bit calmer than the rest that we see on the east and on the western side of the world map. Indeed,
the area that is being, I think Victorinox has said that it wants to go to Latin America and Asia. I mean, where is the market there? Who in Latin America and Asia will suddenly find themselves desiring a Swiss Army knife where perhaps they didn't in the past?
Well, I think that's always the question on how you push demand and how you differentiate yourself. If you're not communicating that you're a Swiss Army knife in those markets, and that you're not attractive and you don't have a product portfolio that is going beyond the Swiss Army knife, but having that Swissness appeal, I would say it's a question of how you address those markets and how you position your brand actively. If you haven't been doing this already, there's a huge potential to design and to form a brand that is really standing for Swissness in those markets much more in the future.
One thing that Victorinox is thinking about doing as well is making different objects, expanding what it sells, and it reminds us of that idea of like, would anybody recognise a product that wasn't a Swiss Army knife by Victorinox, in the same way that why would Ferrari make an aftershave?
Well, you say it. It's a question of time, and it's a question of timeline, how you do those line extensions and those brand extensions. When you start out with a Swiss Army knife and you move into travel products, you move into kitchen cutlery, if you move into specialized craftsmanship that goes around a knife, as a first step, and then extend this brand into other spaces that are useful and that are meaningful from the customer's point of view, that's a long-term strategy that I think is very valuable. This is what you see with a lot of brands, what they have been doing, as you said about Ferrari. I don't know who will ever put on a Ferrari perfume, but there are people that are doing this. Imagine there's a Harley Davidson perfume as well. So it's about the brand image that you have and how you can extend it to markets where it helps you not only to push forward the brand extension, but it helps you to shape your brand image in itself.
Finally, the idea of the brand image of Switzerland is very much under pressure at the moment because of what's happening in the rest of the world, at least because of the United States, because Novartis, the drug manufacturer, is feeling the pressure if tariffs extend to drug makers. But by all accounts, Swatch, who own Omega, and also Nestle are already being hit. So what is happening to brand Switzerland?
I don't know if it is the brand Switzerland or the two companies that you are naming. They have, how should I say, distinctive problems that are more related not to the brand of Switzerland or the Swissness in it, but they have got managerial challenges. And I think what Nestle is facing is a culmination of issues that they had with their water brands that they had and certain behaviors that they showed in certain markets on a global scale. And it hits Nestle right in the face because of their corporate branding. While Swatch has a challenge that it's very much in discussion here in Switzerland if the Swatch company is treated properly as a stock-listed company, or is it more like treated like a family-owned company which happens just to be at the stock market. And I think these two companies are not hit because of the Swissness image, and I don't think they will hit the Swissness image so much because it's pretty independent. And so from my point of view, this is more firm-related than really country-related.
Markus Schögl, Associate Professor at St. Gallen University Institute for Marketing. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you on Monocle on Sunday very soon. And that's all the time we have for today's programme, however. Many thanks to all my guests and to the producers too, Carlotta Rabella, Hassan Anderson and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Joanna Mosa and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance by Mariella Bavin. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow, and on Monday, I should say. Hopefully you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Advice is our craft.